I'm a 42-year-old woman, and this happened not too long ago at my parents' house during what was supposed to be a shared graduation celebration. The whole extended family was invited: cousins, uncles, aunts, and grandparents, because 2 kids in the family had just graduated high school, my daughter and my sister's son. Both were finishing the same year, both with solid grades, both ready to move into the next stage of their lives. My parents had insisted on hosting a big party so that the whole family could mark the occasion together. The house was decorated with banners, balloons, and strings of lights running across the backyard. Food trays covered every table, and my mother had even hired a local band to play in the evening. People milled about, catching up with relatives they hadn't seen in a while, and for the first hour, it really did feel like a happy occasion. Then my father called everyone outside, saying it was time for the big surprise. All the guests filed out onto the driveway. Sitting there with a giant red bow on the hood was a brand new car. It gleamed under the afternoon sun, the paint so fresh it looked like it had just been polished. My nephew stood front and center as my father dangled the keys in his hand and made a show of the presentation. The crowd clapped, phones came out to record the moment, and everyone shouted their congratulations. People joked about who would get the first ride, where he would drive on his first road trip, and how lucky he was to start adulthood with his own car. I watched my daughter standing off to the side. She had been waiting with a smile, expecting that the surprise would be for both graduates. Instead, she stayed still, waiting for someone to call her name, waiting for something that never came. The cheering went on as my nephew sat in the driver's seat and revved the engine, the sound echoing through the neighborhood. My mother wiped away fake tears, saying how proud she was, while the family crowded around to take photos with him in the car. After the excitement settled a little, my father handed me a plain white envelope. I already knew what was inside because I had seen my mother preparing it earlier in the week. My daughter opened it in front of everyone and pulled out a generic gift card. No wrapping, no ribbon, just a rectangle of plastic. The silence around her lasted only a second before people turned back toward my nephew and the car, making comments like, "Oh, cars are just more practical for boys," and "She'll understand. She's a girl. She doesn't need one right now." My daughter pushed the envelope back into her pocket and forced a small smile. No one cheered for her, no one clapped. She stepped back while others looked away, pretending not to notice her embarrassment. The difference between the grand ceremony and her quiet dismissal couldn't have been clearer. I stood there and listened as relatives kept complimenting the gift. They talked about how generous my parents were, how smart it was to give a car, how this would set my nephew up for success. Every word felt like another jab, not because I wanted a car for my daughter, but because of the sheer imbalance. I noticed how she held herself tighter, her shoulders drawn in, and I knew the sting of being overlooked in front of so many people would stay with her. Still, I didn't raise my voice or confront anyone right then. Instead, I surprised everyone by stepping forward with a smile and saying how wonderful the car looked. I complimented the color, the shine, even the bow. The crowd seemed relieved that I wasn't angry, and several people nodded as if everything had been settled. They thought the moment of tension had passed, but I had already started thinking about what would come next. While everyone was still crowded around the car, I clapped my hands and suggested that we should celebrate the new ride with a family road trip. I said it would be the perfect way to break in the car, that we could make a weekend of it, driving through scenic routes and visiting landmarks. The idea caught on instantly. People shouted their agreement, saying it sounded fun and adventurous. My nephew grinned from ear to ear, already imagining himself at the wheel, showing off his car on the open road. No one suspected that I had something else in mind. On the outside, it looked like a generous idea, a way to share in the joy of the gift. But inside, I was already planning every detail. If my daughter was going to be humiliated in front of the entire family, then the family was going to get a taste of what favoritism really looked like. Not in an argument, not in a fight, but in a way they would remember for a long time. I let the party continue without further interruption. The band played, the food was served, and the adults drank wine while the kids laughed together. Every time I caught sight of my daughter, I noticed the way she carried herself differently that evening, smiling politely, but with an edge of sadness that she couldn't quite hide. Every time my nephew boasted about his car, I made a mental note. By the time the night ended, and people began to leave, the plan was firmly planted in my mind. The road trip would happen. The car would be the centerpiece, just as my parents had intended. But by the end of it, everyone who had cheered for the car and ignored my daughter's graduation would see what it felt like when the scales tipped the other way. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of revenge. It was about balance, about teaching them through experience what words could never explain. They had chosen their grand gesture, their show of favoritism. I would choose mine, carefully disguised as a celebration, so that every mile, every stop, every detail would make them think twice the next time they tried to dismiss my child. That night, as I drove my daughter home, she leaned against the window quietly. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I already knew how this story would continue, and I was determined to see it through. Plans moved fast after the party. A group chat filled with relatives started buzzing the next morning with routes, photos of roadside attractions, and jokes about who snores the loudest. My parents offered a list of places they had always wanted to see but never made time for. My sister added souvenir stops and a Lakeview motel she remembered from years ago. I wrote a clean itinerary and a packing checklist and shared a map with pins for fuel, food, and bathrooms. The plan covered 3 days out and 2 days back, with 2 overnight stays in different towns and a final night closer to home. I added backup hotels in case anything fell through. Everyone reacted with thumbs up and hearts. No one asked to change anything. No one offered to manage logistics. I typed that I would handle the routes, lodging, and meals, and the chat went quiet except for more emojis of cars and fireworks. On the morning we left, the driveway looked like a small parade lineup. Coolers, duffel bags, camera bags, folding chairs, and a stack of board games waited by the steps. The new car sat in the center spot with the bow removed, and the paint still shining. People took new photos in daylight before the dust of the road hit. I parked my SUV at the curb with a clean interior, toolkit, jumper cables, and 2 full water jugs tucked into the back. My daughter loaded our snacks into a lidded box, wraps, fruit cups, granola bars, and small cartons of juice. I handed her a second box with paper plates and utensils. She buckled a blanket to the headrest for a quick reach later. Someone shouted that the new car should lead. No one disagreed. My nephew slid behind the wheel with a grin while his parents settled in next to him. Others split between cars. I stayed in the middle of the convoy so I could watch how the group moved. The first hour was smooth. The weather was bright with a light breeze. Playlists jumped from old rock to pop to a road trip mix someone had downloaded. The new car kept a steady speed. Drivers waved at each other at long lights. People in the back seats leaned out of windows for photos at the city limit sign. Before the trip, I had picked the roads marked scenic on the map, the ones with river bends, farm fences, and small bridges. Roads that look pretty on postcards but make a driver pay attention. The lanes narrowed, the shoulders disappeared, and the curves came closer together. The line of cars stretched and closed again as slower tractors and delivery vans forced us into short passes. The new car hesitated on a steep hill, then recovered. The second hill came longer, with a heavy grade and a caution sign about engine strain. Praise for the car continued on the group chat, little messages popping up about how well it handled and how soft the seats were. We reached the third incline just as the sun warmed the pavement. The new car's brake lights flashed, then its turn signal blinked. It rolled to the shoulder with the hood slightly puffed. Not a dramatic cloud, just that hotter shimmer that means something under the hood is not happy. The convoy peeled off behind it. My sister opened the passenger door and waved her hand in front of the grill like she could feel the heat. My nephew got out and looked down at the pavement as if the road had caused the issue. A few drivers walked up with bottled water and suggestions that sounded helpful and did nothing. I popped the rear hatch of my SUV and brought out the water jugs and a folded reflective mat I keep for roadside stops. I set the mat under the new car's hood latch so tools and caps would not touch the dirt. We waited with the engine off. No one wanted to call a tow truck on the first morning. A delivery driver slowed and asked if we needed help. We waved him on. The sun climbed higher, the hot smell drifted, and the new car's shine started to look like a mirror in an oven. To keep things moving, I said we would swap vehicles for the next stretch and let the new car cool. I moved people into my SUV and into the third car in our group. Bags shifted, feet crowded, seatbelts clicked. Spirits stayed light. Someone said it was a new car quirk. Another relative called it breaking in. A cousin climbed into the back row of my SUV with board games balanced on his knees and made a joke about building a fort out of card boxes. Laughter rose, and the trip carried on. Traffic thickened around a small town that advertises itself as a historic stop. My schedule had us arriving at a fish place by the river for lunch, but the scenic roads and the hill delay ate the extra time I had padded in. We still tried. The fish place had a chalkboard sign on the sidewalk. Lunch served until 2 o'clock. We pulled up at 2:15. Chairs were already flipped onto tables inside. A staff member shook a head and pointed toward the posted hours. The next spot, a family diner, had a handwritten note taped to the door about a staffing shortage and an early close. People checked their phones for fast options. The nearest big chain sat across town with a 15-car drive-through line and a note on the app about longer wait times. I opened the back of my SUV and lifted the lidded box into the shade of a maple tree by the parking lot. My daughter handed out wraps and fruit cups to me and herself. I poured us juice and tucked the empty cartons back into a small trash bag. Others scattered to a gas station on the corner and came back with paper sacks of chips and warm sandwiches pressed flat under bottled teas. No one complained directly. A few jokes circled about adventure dining. The group returned to cars with less chatter than before. The route after lunch wound along a river where the guardrail had gaps that revealed steep slopes down to water. The view was good. The driving asked for focus. The new car rejoined the line behind us after sitting out for an hour. At the next pullout, a rest area with a map board and 2 vending machines, I walked to the board and tilted my sunglasses up to read distances. A thin blue line marked a route to a waterfall overlook. A small legend under it noted that the road was paved but narrow and not recommended for large vehicles. I pointed at the map, mentioned how close it was, and said we should add it. No one reached for a calendar or a watch. The chorus was that I was in charge of the itinerary, so we followed the blue line. The turn toward the waterfall came after a 1-lane bridge with yield signs at both ends. The road was paved, yes, but the kind of paved that shows every patch and crack like a topographic map. The shoulder was a hard drop into brush. The last mile climbed clockwise up a ridge with blind curves. Cars moved like beads on a string, one at a time around each corner. The overlook, when we reached it, was a semicircle of gravel with a low fence and a view worth a postcard. White water falling in steps into a pool that flashed silver, even in daylight. People took photos and video and tried to get the whole drop into one frame. A breeze came off the spray, carrying damp air across the overlook and lifting hair at the edges. The detour added time. The sun moved west faster than the cars moved south. I sent a quick note to the motel about our late arrival. Reception answered with a thumbs-up emoji and the words "front desk open until 9. That pushed our dinner plan. I kept us on the route with fewer towns and longer stretches of empty. The new car tried to pass once on a short straight and ducked back as a truck crested the hill ahead. Group chat went quiet, everyone focused on keeping pace. We reached the motel exit at 8:40, and the desk was open, but the restaurant next door had a chalkboard out front that read, "Closed, private event." The second choice across the highway was still lit but had a hostess stand with a sign that read, "Kitchen closes at 9. The wait list showed 20 minutes. I checked the time, shook my head, and said we should grab something quick at the convenience store and meet by the picnic tables in the motel courtyard. The store offered a small hot case with corn dogs turning under a heat lamp, packaged salads with tomorrow's date, and microwave burritos in the freezer. The others filled baskets and made the best of it. My daughter and I sat on a bench under a courtyard light, ate the last of our wraps, and split a small bag of almonds. Back in the rooms, the air unit in one window clicked on and off with a whine every few minutes. The television remote in another room needed batteries. The ice machine near the stairwell rattled like it had a loose bolt. People posted photos from the waterfall anyway. A cousin sent a selfie from the picnic table with a soda can balanced on a knee and a caption about 5-star dining. Laughter returned in small bursts, then faded again. Morning came with the smell of coffee from the lobby and the sound of luggage wheels hitting the concrete walkway. I met everyone at the cars with a folded tourist brochure and tapped the box listing top 5 local landmarks. I pointed to the number 2 spot, a small fort museum on a back road past an old mill, and called it a must-see. The map showed it 20 miles off the main route and up a side road that the brochure called charming. A few people rubbed their eyes. My nephew stretched and glanced at his car as if checking whether it would behave. I said the museum would make the trip feel like a real journey and not just driving. The detour added hours. The side road to the mill ran along a ridge with posted speed limits that dipped to 15 miles per hour in curves. A school bus appeared behind us and stayed there longer than anyone liked. The museum opened late because the Dawson had a flat tire. We waited on a wooden porch under a flag that hung limp. When the door finally opened, the museum held 3 small rooms with maps, uniforms, and a cannon model behind a velvet rope. Everyone walked through quietly. The visitor logbook showed 6 signatures for the week. On the drive back to the main highway, talk shifted from playlists and jokes to comments about timing. A cousin asked in the group chat if we could pick a shorter lunch stop. Another asked how far the next fuel station was since the new car burned more than expected. I sent a reply with exact miles to fuel and a time target for the next stop. We reached a diner with an open sign blinking, slid into booths, and ordered fast. The food arrived slow. The afternoon light slipped down the window glass as we waited for checks. By the time we got back on the road, the trip had a different sound. Less music, fewer photos, more glances at the clock on the dash. Praise for the new car softened. People commented on seats that felt stiff after long runs, and how the back row got crowded with jackets and backpacks. No one said the word mistake. No one asked to turn around. The line of cars moved forward because the plan said forward, but the energy changed. The first cracks showed, quiet ones, the kind that widened mile by mile without a single loud moment. The second morning of the trip started slower than the first. Luggage wheels rolled across the parking lot again, but this time without chatter or jokes. People dragged their bags rather than swinging them over shoulders. Coffee cups were clutched tightly, and more than one person rubbed at stiff necks from a poor night's sleep. The smell of reheated convenience store food still lingered in the air from the night before. Despite the awkward mood, my nephew strutted across the lot toward his car, tossing the keys in his hand. He announced that it was time to put his new ride back in the lead. His parents nodded along, making small comments about how every new vehicle just needed a little breaking in. No one wanted to argue first thing in the morning, so the group agreed, and we loaded up again. I slipped into my SUV and pulled out behind them, keeping the same mid-convoy position. The day's route was meant to cover more ground, moving us through farm country before climbing toward a stretch of forest roads. The map showed the first gas station more than 60 miles away, but the new car guzzled through fuel faster than anyone expected. 40 minutes into the drive, the low fuel light blinked on. My nephew signaled and veered off to a small rural station with 2 pumps and 1 attendant. Everyone else followed because staying together seemed easier than splitting up. The stop dragged on. Only 1 pump worked, and the line of cars behind us grew longer. A truck driver tapped his horn twice before pulling away in frustration. The station's card reader failed twice before finally accepting payment. While we waited, the group milled around the parking lot, leaning against fenders and swapping half-hearted jokes. By the time we got back on the road, we had already lost almost an hour. Not even 2 hours later, the fuel gauge dipped again. My nephew pulled into another station, this one attached to a small grocery with a sign advertising bait and tackle. Some of the family wandered inside for snacks, returning with paper bags of chips and candy. Others stayed in the cars, fanning themselves with folded maps. My daughter opened our cooler and handed me a cold juice box, then slid one to herself, quiet and efficient. By the third stop, even my nephew looked uneasy. He fumbled with the nozzle and checked the receipt twice. His parents repeated that it was normal, that all cars drank more gas on back roads. A cousin muttered about wasting the whole morning at gas stations. Another relative asked how many more hours we had left. I reminded them all with a smile that this was part of the authentic road trip experience. People laughed weakly, but no one argued with me. We finally pushed through into the afternoon, but the delays meant my carefully timed lunch plan dissolved again. The small diner I had marked on the map was already finished with lunch service when we arrived. The waitress at the door pointed to the hours posted in the window and shrugged. The group settled for fast food next to a highway exit. Burgers came squashed in paper wrappers, fries soggy from steam. Families ate quickly in booths, eyes on the clock. My daughter unwrapped a sandwich I had packed from the cooler and shared it with me at a corner table. She didn't complain once, but I saw her glance around at the others, noticing the difference. Back on the road, conversation dulled. Music played in one car, but it wasn't loud enough to carry to the others. People leaned against windows and dozed. The new car's wipers squeaked loudly across the windshield when a short drizzle hit, grating on everyone's ears. At a long red light, I caught sight of my nephew slapping the steering wheel in frustration. As the sun dropped lower, I guided the group toward the motel I had quietly picked in advance. The online listing called it budget-friendly and simple. The sign outside flickered with half-lit neon letters. Paint peeled along the railings, and the parking lot was cracked with weeds poking through. The group hesitated, but I waved them into spaces and walked straight to the office. The clerk behind the counter slid old-fashioned keys across the desk, each with a plastic tag. The complaints started almost immediately. Rooms smelled like damp carpet. One air conditioning unit rattled, but barely pushed air. The internet connection never appeared, though a paper taped near the phone listed a password. Towels were thin, and the curtains didn't fully close. A cousin stepped back outside and muttered that camping in the cars might be more comfortable. My nephew kicked at the floor of his room and grumbled about how the car deserved a nicer place to park. I carried in the cooler and a bag of blankets from my SUV. My daughter spread one blanket over the bed and unpacked our snacks onto the nightstand. We sat cross-legged, eating crackers, fruit, and cheese slices while the others shuffled between rooms, trading complaints. Through the thin walls, I heard my nephew's parents whispering in sharp tones. Words like expensive, ungrateful, and why not a used car instead floated through the cracks. My nephew muttered back, his voice carrying a sulky edge. The argument stayed low, but everyone could feel it. The glossy glow of the gift had started to dull. I walked past their door on the way to the ice machine and paused long enough to catch the tail end of the conversation. They were debating whether it had been a mistake to give such a big gift in front of everyone. That was my moment to step in. I stopped by with a neutral smile and suggested that maybe it would have been easier to rent a larger vehicle for the trip. The comment landed like a stone in water, ripples of silence spreading. They scrambled to defend their choice, repeating that it was important for their son to have something of his own, that the car was practical, that he deserved it. Their voices shook with more doubt than conviction. Later that evening, while people lounged outside their rooms under the buzzing porch lights, my daughter finally spoke up. She didn't raise her voice. She simply said that getting a gift card while someone else got a car didn't feel fair. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A cousin holding a soda can froze with it halfway to his mouth. My parents looked down at their shoes. My sister's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The silence stretched. No one knew how to answer her directly. I let it sit for a long beat before adding my own words. I said that favoritism creates moments exactly like this. Heavy, awkward, dividing. I didn't shout or accuse. I just put it in the air, and no one could swat it away. The rest of the night moved in fragments. A few relatives tried to start new conversations, but voices stayed subdued. The television in one room played too loud, as if to fill the gap. The vending machine clunked as coins dropped. My daughter curled under the extra blanket I had packed, her eyes following the glow of the street lamp outside. When the motel finally quieted, the family went to bed unsettled. Doors shut, lights clicked off, and the hum of the weak air conditioning filled the silence. No one apologized, no one admitted fault, but everyone carried the weight of what had been said. The second day ended, not with laughter or stories about the road, but with the kind of silence that follows a truth too sharp to ignore. The third day started hotter than the others. The sun had barely cleared the motel roof, and already the air felt heavy. People shuffled to their cars with bottles of water in hand and damp hair sticking to their necks. My nephew marched straight to his car, twirling the keys around his finger and announcing that it was time to prove the vehicle worked fine. His parents nodded quickly, agreeing before anyone else could object. No one wanted to spark another argument in the parking lot, so the group fell in line behind him. We pulled onto the highway with his car in the lead again. The first few miles passed quietly, just the sound of engines and the occasional chirp from walkie-talkies someone had brought along. 10 miles later, the heat settled in like a blanket. Asphalt shimmered ahead, making the road look like it bent and rippled. The air conditioning in the new car began coughing out weak gusts. Within minutes, it quit altogether. The windows went down, but the air outside felt like it had been pulled straight from an oven. Shirts stuck to backs, hair plastered to foreheads, and sweat beaded on everyone's skin. In my SUV, I let them stew for a while. I kept my own air conditioning running and watched through the windshield as arms flapped uselessly at open windows in the car ahead. At the next pull-off, people stumbled out, fanning themselves with paper maps and muttering about how unbearable it was. I mentioned lightly that my SUV had working air conditioning, if they wanted to switch for the next leg. The suggestion hung in the air, but my nephew brushed it off, determined to keep going. His parents backed him again, repeating the same line about how all new cars had kinks to work out. We pressed on. The route I had chosen stretched across a long scenic drive, a ribbon of two-lane road with fields on both sides and no gas stations in sight. I had checked in advance. The new car guzzled through fuel faster in the heat, and soon the low fuel light flickered on again. Nervous glances passed between my nephew and his parents, but no stations appeared. I eased my SUV closer and motioned to the shoulder. We pulled over, dust curling around our tires. I opened the back of my SUV and pulled out the spare cans I had packed before we left. The smell of gasoline hit the air as I unscrewed the caps. My nephew crouched awkwardly, holding the funnel while his father steadied the can. People gathered around, shading their eyes from the sun, watching as if the act itself might spark. Once the car had enough to move on, I slid the empty can back into my hatch and shut it neatly. A few relatives praised my foresight, calling it clever and prepared. But even then, they clung to the idea that the car was still a wonderful gift. By the time we reached the next town, stomachs growled. I had set up a lunch stop, but when we walked into the restaurant, the hostess frowned at the size of our group. Tables were pushed together for most of us, but there weren't enough chairs. I shrugged and mentioned that the diner only accepted walk-ins and hadn't been taking bookings, which explained the lack of space. My daughter and I took the best seats against the wall with a full view of the room, while my nephew and his parents were left standing with their plates balanced in their hands. The rest of the family settled quickly, chatting and eating, while my nephew shifted from foot to foot, glaring at his food like it had betrayed him. Through it all, my daughter stayed quiet, but observant. She noticed how no one complained when I drove, how the tension always rose when my nephew was at the wheel. She ate slowly, enjoying the seat she had been given. I caught her eye once, and she glanced at her cousin's parents standing awkwardly with their plates. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. After lunch, the clouds rolled in. A sudden storm darkened the sky and rain splattered across windshields. The new car's wipers screeched loudly against the glass, a shrill sound that made everyone wince. I kept my own wipers steady, gliding smoothly across the windshield. At the next service station, I suggested that maybe it would be wise to leave the car at a local mechanic for a quick checkup. My nephew protested at first, but his parents glanced at the sky and finally agreed. The mechanic promised to take a look and waved us off, saying it would take a few hours. That left us with only my SUV for the rest of the day. Space was tight, luggage shifted under feet, elbows knocked together, and seatbelts cut across hips at uncomfortable angles. My nephew grumbled the loudest, complaining about being squished. When I organized the seating, I accidentally placed my daughter in the most comfortable spot, the passenger seat with legroom and a full view, while my nephew ended up crammed in the middle of the back row between two cousins. His knees bumped against the seat in front of him every time we hit a bump. The drive dragged on, rain pattering against the roof, the smell of damp clothes filling the air. Conversations thinned. My daughter leaned back, her blanket draped across her lap, while my nephew shifted endlessly in his seat. His parents whispered in low voices, trying to smooth things over, but the atmosphere remained heavy. By nightfall, the mood had soured completely. We pulled into another motel, this one with peeling paint and buzzing lights. People shuffled inside without their earlier energy, dragging bags and muttering under their breath. My nephew sulked, stomping ahead of the group, while his parents forced smiles and urged everyone to stay positive. The third day ended with the same crackling tension as the storm outside. My daughter stretched out comfortably in her bed, eating a granola bar from the stash I had packed, while I heard my nephew's muffled complaints through the wall. His parents tried to keep the peace, whispering about how the trip was still meant to be fun. But no one in the family missed how quickly the balance had shifted, how the car that was supposed to be the crown jewel of the celebration had turned into a burden, dragging everyone down. The lesson was building, mile by mile, without a single loud explosion, just slow, steady pressure, until the cracks could no longer be ignored. Day 4 started brighter than the others. The storm had cleared overnight, leaving the air fresh and the sky a sharp blue. Everyone dragged themselves to the parking lot, expecting another long drive. But I clapped my hands and announced we'd be taking a break from highways. I had arranged something special for the morning, a hiking trail just outside town. The group exchanged looks, some groaning under their breath, but they followed anyway. My nephew, already sulking from the cramped car ride the day before, kicked at the gravel and muttered about how his new car wasn't being shown off properly. His parents rushed to soothe him, but there was no way around it. The car was staying parked while we stretched our legs. The trailhead sat at the edge of a state park, marked by a weathered wooden sign. The path disappeared into the trees, a narrow dirt route lined with rocks and roots. I handed my daughter a wide-brimmed hat and a bottle of water from my pack. She pulled them on with a grin, ready to go. The others looked down at their flip-flops, plastic sandals, and empty hands with less enthusiasm. My nephew groaned as soon as the incline started. Within 10 minutes, he was dragging his feet, complaining about blisters, while my daughter kept an easy pace right beside me. Every switchback revealed another stretch of uphill climb. My daughter powered ahead, stepping carefully but confidently. The nephew stumbled, asking for breaks every few minutes. His parents called out excuses for him. Too hot, too many rocks, shoes not broken in. I raised my voice enough for everyone to hear, praising my daughter's endurance and pointing out how well she handled herself. People nodded, some smiling at her, others side-eyeing my nephew as he plopped onto a boulder with his arms crossed. Halfway up, I pulled another water bottle and a small pack of trail mix from my bag and handed them to my daughter. She tucked them into her pocket without fuss. The others asked if I had more, but I shook my head. They grumbled, passing around the single lukewarm bottle someone else had brought. My sister muttered something about me always being prepared. I smiled and adjusted my daughter's hat against the sun. The difference was clear, and the family saw it. I was prepared for my child. No one else had been prepared for theirs. By the time we reached the lookout point, the nephew was red-faced and breathing heavily, slumping onto a bench with his shoes off and his socks turned damp with sweat. My daughter leaned against the railing, gazing out at the view of the valley. The family clustered for photos, the nephew half hidden behind his parents while my daughter stood tall in the center. After the hike, we piled into the cars again and drove into town. At a diner along the highway, everyone slid into vinyl booths and placed orders. Plates of pancakes and burgers arrived quickly, filling the air with the smell of syrup and grease. My daughter laughed with a cousin over a shared plate of fries, joining in on inside jokes. My nephew sat hunched at the end of the booth, picking at his food, eyes darting to conversations that didn't include him. No one reached out to bring him in. The mood at the table belonged to everyone else. That evening, I guided the group to the motel I had picked. This one was smaller than the rest, a 2-story building with fewer rooms. At the desk, I accidentally booked fewer beds than we needed. When the keys were handed out, my daughter got a room with me and a proper bed to herself. My nephew ended up in a room where the only extra sleeping spot was a lumpy couch with a sagging middle cushion. His parents fussed, fluffing pillows and stacking extra blankets, but nothing fixed how uncomfortable it looked. The strain finally snapped after dinner when everyone regrouped outside by the parking lot. Someone brought up the car again, asking when it would be ready from the mechanic. My nephew's parents launched into another defense, calling it a practical gift, insisting it made sense, repeating how it would set him up for adulthood. Voices grew sharper as others raised eyebrows, shifting uncomfortably. I spoke up calmly, reminding them that practicality doesn't excuse unfairness. A car might be useful, but so was recognizing both children equally. The air turned heavy. My daughter, who had been quiet until then, lifted her head and spoke again. She said the gift card felt thoughtless compared to the car. The words hung between us, sharp and undeniable. Conversation stopped, forks clinked against plates, and then went still. My parents looked away. My sister stared at the ground. The silence cracked when my nephew lashed out, his voice carrying over the group. He shouted that the whole trip felt like a punishment, that nothing had been fun, that every plan seemed made to make him miserable. No one rushed to deny it. A few cousins exchanged glances. His parents stammered, trying to soften his words, but the truth had already slipped out. I suggested then, with an easy tone, that maybe we should just cut the trip short and head home early. The car had been a problem, the motels weren't ideal, and everyone looked tired, but almost immediately voices rose in protest. No, we should finish what we started. No, we couldn't just quit halfway. People insisted the trip was still a good idea, even though their faces said otherwise. They clung to the idea out of stubbornness, not because they believed it anymore. By the time everyone drifted back into their rooms, the cracks were too visible to ignore. My daughter stretched out comfortably on her bed, reading through the brochures I had collected. My nephew tossed and turned on the couch, springs creaking every time he shifted. His parents whispered again in sharp tones through the thin walls. The rest of the family stayed quiet, each of them carrying the same thought unspoken: favoritism had left its mark, and no amount of excuses could hide it anymore. The night settled with the sound of the highway outside, headlights sweeping across the curtains. The trip still had days left, but the easy cheer of the beginning was gone. Every mile forward was carrying the family deeper into a truth they didn't want to face. The surface smiles couldn't cover it, and every small choice I made pulled the veil a little thinner. They had wanted a celebration. What they had was a mirror they couldn't look away from. Day 5 started with a map spread across the hood of my SUV, and a line traced in yellow highlighter through the mountains. I called it a fun challenge. A full day along winding roads with overlooks, switchbacks, and a couple of tiny towns that still kept hand-painted signs. The plan circled back toward the valley by night, looping us past a lake and through one last ridge before we cut south again. Everyone gathered around the map, eyes landing on the hairpin symbols sprinkled across the route. A few swallowed hard. I capped the marker and clapped my hands. We loaded up. The mechanic still had my nephew's car. The shop had promised a call by late afternoon. That meant my SUV carried everyone again, bodies wedged in with backpacks at their feet and jackets stuffed under knees. I adjusted the seating before anyone could claim a spot. My daughter took the prime seat up front with the best legroom and the cleanest view. The others fit where space allowed. My nephew squeezed into the back middle seat between two cousins. His shoulders pressed on both sides. Seatbelts clicked. The doors shut with a thud that echoed across the motel lot. We rolled out early to beat the traffic on the first pass. The road left town and began climbing within minutes. Lines of pines tightening along the shoulder. The grade steepened and the lanes narrowed. I kept the speed steady and the gaps clean. A bicyclist appeared in the mirror, then faded behind a bend. Rocks the size of fists marked where winter slides had kissed the edge of the asphalt. The sun rose fast and caught the windshield in white flashes where the trees thinned. Music set the tone. I cued a playlist of my daughter's favorites and let it run from start to finish. She tapped her fingers on her knee in time with the drums while the cousins in the back tried to talk over it and gave up. A request to change the track floated from the very back, followed by another and another. I pretended not to hear and turned the volume up just enough to fill the car without drowning out the engine. The first turnout overlooked a valley tucked like a green bowl between ridges. We pulled in behind a camper and a pickup with 2 kayaks strapped to the roof. Everyone climbed out, blinking at the sudden silence. The air at that height carried the smell of sap and stone. I opened the rear hatch and lifted out a small cooler I had kept buried under blankets. Inside sat a bakery cake in a tight white box, its edges taped shut. I set it on the ledge of the hatch, popped the lid, and revealed frosting in school colors with both graduates' names piped across the top. A small stack of paper plates and a plastic knife appeared from the same cooler. The group gathered before anyone could ask where it came from. I lit 2 tiny candles from a half-used pack and cupped my hand against the wind while they burned. My daughter stood at the center of the circle. The first slice went to her. A cousin snapped a photo at the exact moment the knife pressed through the frosting. My nephew edged closer with a half laugh that did not reach his eyes. He took his slice next, but the crowd stayed turned toward my daughter, asking her to hold the plate higher for another photo, then to stand by the railing for a solo shot. Applause rose. My nephew's parents clapped too, exchanging short glances that gave away more than they intended. We cleaned up fast and followed the ridge to a small town whose main street had angle parking and an antique shop with a bell on the door. I steered straight to a university campus a few blocks away, the kind with red brick halls, a bell tower, and banners hanging from light poles for incoming classes. We parked by the visitor center. A student guide handed out a folded map and pointed to a self-guided path. We walked the loop across lawns trimmed in sharp lines, past a sculpture garden and the science building's glass lobby where posters advertised research projects. My daughter's name flickered on a digital board of accepted students in the atrium, part of a welcome slideshow I had arranged in advance with the admissions office. A cousin whistled low. Photos happened again, this time at the sign with the school crest. My nephew tried to steer the conversation back toward his car. Newness, trim level, a planned modification, but someone pointed out that his car was still in the shop and turned back to the board with the names. The moment moved on without him. Back on the road, the mountains tightened their grip. Signposts warned of falling rock and advised lower gears. The air cooled as clouds built over the spine of the ridge. We passed a turnout with a metal tube that echoed when kids shouted into it. Laughter spilled from the fence line as strangers tried it. I kept the group rolling to make the next stop on time. After lunch in a town that leaned into its mining past with murals of pickaxes and a display of rusted ore carts, I aimed us at a roadside attraction I'd found on a review site, a tin dinosaur park built in the 70s by a retired welder. The sign out front read "Quirky Fun" in fading paint. The parking lot stretched gravelly and empty. A small booth took cash only. We walked through a squeaking turnstile into an acre of hand-cut metal creatures standing frozen on stumpy legs, each labeled with laminated cards. The metal smelled like hot pennies under the sun. Kids from another minivan ran past with paper crowns. Our group wandered the path. A cousin took a photo with a Tyrannosaurus whose jaw sagged on one side. The novelty wore out in 15 minutes. People drifted back to the gate and stood in the thin shade of a flagpole. Enthusiasm drained by inches. My nephew hit his limit after that. In the car, he kicked lightly at the bag near his feet and announced he wanted to go home. He listed reasons: boring stops, cramped seats, the car stuck with strangers, nothing going his way. No one answered. Eyes stayed fixed on the road. He folded his arms and stared through the headrest in front of him. The mood tightened and then flattened. The lake came next, a sheet of blue behind a dam with concrete stairs leading down to a little beach. We parked and climbed out. I pulled a small kite from the trunk, the kind that assembles in 2 snaps, and handed it to my daughter. The wind off the water was perfect. The kite climbed fast on the first run. A couple of kids nearby cheered. The string hummed as she let it out in long loops. When it dipped, she guided it back up with a clean tug. The others watched with soft smiles that did not reach their eyes. My nephew's parents shifted from foot to foot, glancing at the time, not sure where to rest their gaze. As we packed the kite away, my daughter leaned closer and thanked me in a voice so low it barely registered above the breeze. No grand moment, just a small line of words meant for 2 people. She folded the kite, tucked it under her arm, and carried it back without another sound. The mechanic called as the sun slid behind the ridge. The message came through: the car needed parts they did not have on hand until morning. Another night without it. I relayed the update while keeping the steering straight through the next narrow pass. My nephew's parents went quiet. Their hands tightened around their phones. We rolled into the Knight's Motel after dark. A yellow sign flickered above the office door. The owner slid keys through a gap in plexiglass and pushed a local restaurant flyer across the counter. A chilly draft threaded through the hallway. In the rooms, the heaters clicked on and then off, then on again, blowing air that never warmed. Thermostats turned up and down did nothing. I opened my SUV and pulled out 2 thick blankets I had kept in a sealed bag. My daughter spread one on her bed and handed the other to me. We locked the door and tucked in. In the rooms next door, the temperature never climbed. Voices floated through the walls about draft stoppers and spare towels stuffed under doors. A cousin knocked lightly to ask if we had extra blankets. I shook my head with an apologetic look and pointed to the front desk where a hand-printed note already declared, "No extra blankets available." People layered on coats, hoodies, and whatever they could find in suitcases. The air conditioner's ghost hum stayed in the vents even with the switch flipped to heat. By midnight, the parking lot had quieted. Breath showed faintly when someone stepped out for a phone call. My daughter slept with her blanket pulled to her chin, the room calm and still. Through the thin curtains, a passing truck sent light sliding across the ceiling in slow stripes. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed as someone tried the vending machine. The heater rattled and fell silent again. The day had held a cake on a mountain, a campus tour with her name in lights, a dinosaur park past its prime, and a cold snap that met us with bare heaters and short supplies. Every piece landed where it needed to. No big speeches, no shouting matches to carry the point. Just a pattern that repeated until it could not be mistaken. Each choice sat exactly where the balance had been off. The family saw it even if they refused to say it. The night pressed on, thin and cold for most, warm enough for 2. In the morning, the road would still be there, and so would the lesson, waiting for the next set of miles. The final morning broke colder than expected. The motel room still carrying the chill from the faulty heaters. People shuffled into the parking lot with stiff shoulders, tired eyes, and jackets pulled close. Conversations were clipped, reduced to short answers. The energy of the first day was long gone. Bags thudded into trunks without jokes or small talk. My nephew dragged his feet, yawning loud enough for everyone to hear. His parents stayed close to him, their voices low and quick, as if trying to hold the family together with threads that were already snapping. I clapped my hands and announced that before we headed home, I had one last grand stop planned, a lakeside picnic. The words sparked faint murmurs. A cousin asked if it would take long. I smiled and promised it was worth it. No one pushed back. They were too drained to argue, too used to following my itinerary. We loaded into my SUV for the last time. The mechanic still hadn't finished with the car, and the call confirming that it needed another day came just as we pulled out. My nephew scowled and shoved his phone back into his pocket. I kept the music tuned to my daughter's playlist. Her songs filled the car, rising and falling in rhythm with the winding road. My nephew made half-hearted requests to change it, but I didn't reach for the controls. The cousins in the back gave up and leaned against the windows, watching the trees blur past. My daughter hummed along quietly, the sound threading through the silence. The lake appeared suddenly between breaks in the trees, a wide stretch of water catching the morning light. We rolled into the picnic area, and before anyone could ask how, everything was already waiting. Days earlier, I had called a friend who lived nearby and arranged it. A long table stood under a wooden shelter, covered with a red and white checkered cloth. Coolers sat in the shade. Plates, cups, and folded napkins were stacked neatly at one end. The air smelled faintly of grilled chicken, fresh fruit, and baked bread. As everyone approached, my daughter spotted her favorite foods immediately, her preferred sandwiches, the fruit she loved, even the cookies she always reached for first. The table was built for her, every detail in place. My nephew's parents scanned the spread, realizing nothing catered to their son's tastes. The discomfort showed in their eyes before they quickly masked it with polite smiles. Family members picked up plates, trying to carry on as if nothing was unusual, but the contrast was impossible to ignore. My daughter sat at the head of the table without being told, food arranged neatly in front of her. My nephew hovered near the middle, silent, his parents close on either side. The balance had tipped, and everyone felt it. When the plates were full, I raised my glass of sparkling water. Everyone followed. I congratulated both graduates, but as I spoke, I rested my hand on my daughter's shoulder, holding her steady in the spotlight. The moment stretched. My nephew stabbed at his food without looking up. His parents clapped, though their faces betrayed them. The rest of the family shifted in their seats, uneasy but unwilling to interrupt. The quiet cracked when my nephew muttered that the whole trip was unfair. His voice cut across the table. Forks paused midair. Chairs scraped as people shifted uncomfortably. That was the opening I had been waiting for. I leaned forward and asked the family if they remembered the graduation party when my daughter opened a plain gift card while her cousin received a car with a bow on the hood. The question landed heavy. No one answered. Silence spread, wide and immovable. Every eye lowered, every face turned away. I told them that the trip had mirrored that same imbalance, only reversed. The detours, the food, the beds, the comforts, all of it had been intentional, not accidents, not coincidences, a reflection of how favoritism poisons celebrations. I spoke calmly, my voice even, leaving no room for misunderstanding. My daughter lifted her head and added her voice. She said this was the first time she felt like someone had fought for her place in the family. The words hung in the air, simple and final. A cousin nodded slightly. My parents shifted in their seats. My sister pressed her lips together, looking everywhere but at me. My nephew's parents tried one last defense. They repeated that the car was practical, that their son needed it, that it wasn't about favoritism. But their words faltered. Their voices trailed off as the weight of guilt pressed down. No one rushed to agree with them this time. I didn't raise my tone. I didn't argue. I simply stated that my daughter deserved the same respect, the same attention, and the same thought as any other grandchild. The table stayed silent. Not one person disagreed. We finished the meal quietly. Plates emptied, cups drained, leftovers packed into bags. The laughter and easy chatter from the first days of the trip never returned. When it came time to pack up, people moved quickly, eager to get back on the road. The picnic shelter emptied, leaving the red and white cloth fluttering in the breeze. The drive home was heavy. Music played softly, but no one sang along. My nephew sat stiff in the back seat, arms folded tight. His parents stared out the windows, lips pressed into thin lines. The cousins whispered about school and jobs, avoiding anything to do with the car. My daughter leaned her head against the glass, quiet but steady. We reached the final highway and the miles slipped by in silence. No apologies came, no confessions or explanations, just the steady rhythm of tires against asphalt and the weight of what had been said. When we finally pulled into the driveway where the trip had begun, people grabbed their bags quickly, eager to escape into their own homes. Hugs were shorter, words clipped. My parents muttered about unpacking. My sister hurried her son toward the door, and the cousins waved without lingering. The lesson didn't need more words. It hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Favoritism, left unchecked, could come back mile by mile until the balance was impossible to ignore. My daughter walked beside me, her steps even and sure, and together we closed the car doors on a trip none of them would ever forget.